Welcome to This Explainer. Now, you already know the story of the Titanic, and you definitely know the massive '97 blockbuster. But today, we're diving into the freezing waters of the North Atlantic through a totally different cinematic lens. We're looking at the 1958 classic film, A Night to Remember. What we're going to explore today is how this masterpiece actually serves as the definitive, factual blueprint for pretty much all modern Titanic adaptations. I mean, it's the ultimate docudrama, and digging into it gives us a completely new appreciation for how cinematic history is told. So, let's kick things off with a bit of a provocative question. What really makes the perfect Titanic movie? Does a cinematic masterpiece about a historical tragedy absolutely require a sweeping Hollywood romance to capture our hearts? Or is the cold, hard historical accuracy enough to keep us riveted? It's a really fascinating debate, and as we go through this explainer together, I want you to just keep this question right in the back of your mind. Because right off the bat, you can see the stark contrast between these two cinematic approaches. On one side, you have the 1997 blockbuster we all know, using that fictional Jack and Rose romance as its emotional core. But on the other side, the 1958 film A Night to Remember completely skips the romance. Directed by Roy Ward Baker, it operates purely as a factual docudrama ensemble. Instead of focusing on two made-up lovers, it tells the story through the eyes of dozens of real-life passengers and crew. You're shifting rapidly, and tensely, I might add, between the sweltering boiler rooms, the opulent first-class dining saloon, and that freezing, chaotic boat deck. All right, let's dive into Section 1. No Jack, no Rose. The anchor of truth. Okay, so if you completely strip away the fictional romance, you still need someone compelling to anchor the story, right? Instead of a fictional lead, this narrative is anchored by Second Officer Charles Light-Toller, played brilliantly by Kenneth More. And why Light-Toller? Well, because he was a real historical figure. Actually, he was the most senior officer to survive the sinking. By framing the events around him, the film lets us witness the tragedy through his true-to-life sense of duty. We experience that terrible night exactly as he did, watching his initial, calm professionalism just slowly unravel into growing horror as the mathematical reality of the sinking sets in. It completely grounds the film. Moving right along to Section 2, the ultimate docudrama. Unprecedented historical accuracy. The lengths this production team went to just to get the facts right were, honestly, unheard of at the time. This timeline of authenticity is just mind-blowing. Back in 1911, the producer William McQuitty was just 6 years old when he stood at the shipyard in Belfast and literally watched the real RMS Titanic launch into the water. He was an eyewitness to the ship's birth. Then, jump to 1955, Walter Lord publishes his meticulously researched book, which becomes the source material. And just 3 years later, in 1958, this remarkable film drops. But the dedication to history didn't stop with the producer's childhood memories. The author of the source material, Walter Lord, was super involved in the production. He actually brought real Titanic survivors directly onto the set to serve as historical consultants. I mean, just imagine being an actor on the set and having an actual survivor standing right there, making sure every single detail, from the panic in the air to exactly how the lifebelts were tied, was as accurate as humanly possible. And to recreate the sinking itself with that terrifying realism, the production took 3 massive steps. First, they went straight to the source and got the original blueprints from the actual shipbuilders. Second, they used those blueprints to build these massive, heavy sets mounted on hydraulic jacks. And third, since they couldn't just rely on CGI back then, they used those jacks to physically tilt the decks while the cameras were rolling. When you see actors struggling to walk up a slanted deck in this movie, they aren't faking it. They're genuinely fighting gravity on a severely tilted set. Which brings us to Section 3, the James Cameron connection, the blueprint in action. Look, it is absolutely impossible to talk about A Night to Remember without addressing the 1997 elephant in the room. James Cameron himself has openly admitted that this 1958 masterclass was a massive influence on his blockbuster. And Cameron didn't just casually watch this movie. He studied it. He knew the 1958 film had perfectly nailed the mechanics and the human element of the disaster. You can literally see the visual DNA transferring over. Cameron did near shot-for-shot recreations of several iconic moments from A Night to Remember. Take the tragic shot of the ship's builder, Thomas Andrews, staring blankly at a painting while adjusting the clock as the room floods. Both films capture the heartbreaking poignancy of the band playing on. Both films show Light-Toller and the other men balancing precariously on the hull of an overturned collapsible lifeboat in the freezing water. The 1997 film's roots are undeniably planted in 1958. Now here's one of my favorite little-known connections. It involves the SS Californian. The 1958 film spends a lot of screen time on this ship, which was only miles away from the sinking Titanic, but tragically ignored the distress rockets simply because their wireless operator was asleep. What's wild is that James Cameron actually filmed these exact Californian scenes for his movie to mirror A Night to Remember, but he ultimately cut them from the final release for pacing. So if you really want to see this agonizing part of the historical puzzle play out on screen, the 1958 film is where you have to go. Let's move to Section 4, Hubris and Class Divide. Themes of the tragedy. This part is absolutely gut-wrenching. The film leans heavily into the tragedy of human overconfidence, the pure hubris of building this lavish, opulent ship but only putting enough lifeboats on it for half the people. And it highlights the stark reality of the class divide without ever being preachy about it. On one hand, you have first-class passengers casually debating if they even want to bother getting into the lifeboats, treating it like a minor inconvenience. Then, in devastating contrast, the steerage passengers are shown literally physically locked below decks as the water rises. It is a quiet but incredibly powerful social commentary. Finally, Section 5, Quiet Heroism in Tragedy, True Professionalism. Amidst all that hubris and horror, the film also delivers these incredible moments of pure humanity. Instead of flashy Hollywood action movie heroics, A Night to Remember honors the real victims by focusing on their quiet heroism and unwavering professionalism in the face of certain doom. We get these powerful, true moments, like the engineers. These men bravely stayed deep down in those terrifying flooding boiler rooms, just working the pumps and generators to keep the ship's lights on as long as they possibly could, ensuring everyone else could see to escape. And equally moving, you have the dedicated wireless operators. They didn't run when things got bad. Instead, they stayed right at their stations, relentlessly tapping out SOS signals into the dark, desperately trying to contact any ship that might hear them. They stayed right up until the freezing water was literally washing over their ankles. It's this true, unvarnished professionalism that makes the film so emotionally devastating to watch. So, wrapping up this explainer, let's circle back to that question we started with. Look at everything we've uncovered today. We've got the eyewitness producer, real survivors advising on set, massive hydraulic tilting decks, and the raw, quiet heroism of everyday people facing the unthinkable. So does a historical film really need a Hollywood romance to be great? Or is the unvarnished, meticulously researched truth actually the most compelling, powerful story we can possibly tell? I hope this deep dive into A Night to Remember has given you a whole new perspective on how history gets brought to life. Thanks so much for learning with me today.